And welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Hello, Ray. How are you?
I'm very good, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing good. We're trying to stay in a little bit. Got a little snow on the ground, not much, but a little bit. So it's nice to have that. We don't get that very often in East Tennessee.
No, we don't. Usually it waits till February.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we have a very, very special guest with us today, and this is a good friend of yours, Ray. So why don't you introduce them for us?
I'll be happy to. We're really glad to have Denise Kiernan with us today. Denise is a friend from, Denise, if you think about it, it probably goes back about 10 to 12 years because you were working on the Girls of Atomic City. And I think you published that in 2013. But you wrote on it and worked on it for 2 or 3 years there when you were coming to Oak Ridge frequently. And I still remember the phone call about you had seen one of Ed Westcott's photographs on the internet and had decided you wanted to write a book about the women in Oak Ridge. And I told you, I said, hey, I'll be glad to help. I'll introduce you to them. As you know, I only introduced you to one. And that was Colleen Black, and she took over from there and introduced you to all the rest. But anyway, we're so glad to have you with us today, and obviously there are hidden history stories about your efforts in writing the book, The Girls of Atomic City. So with that, let's launch into a conversation, and we'll let it go where it wants to, but start off by talking to us a little bit about that book, okay?
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here. It's very nice to hear that you have just a sprinkling of snow. I'm sitting here with about 6 inches in my backyard. So there's been no driving yesterday, today, probably no driving tomorrow either. Maybe we'll get out of our house on Wednesday. It's quite beautiful. I feel very lucky I don't have to go anywhere. And it's always great to be able to talk with folks about hidden history in general, which is something that's very dear to my heart. And of course, Oak Ridge and the folks I met there and the history I was able to share by spending time there. And, it's funny because, Ray, you mentioned the photograph I saw. And people always ask me whether it's about Girls of Atomic City or signing their lives away or we gather together, The Last Castle. Why did you decide to write this book? And it's funny, I was actually working on a book with my husband, Joe Dagnese, who's also a writer and a journalist, for the Smithsonian Museums. And it was called Chemistry 101. Very exciting title. And it was for the Smithsonian Museums. And it was one of those books that they were selling in their gift shop. So if you had gone through the Smithsonian Science Museum and wanted to say to yourself, gee, I wish I remembered a little bit more about, high school chemistry or, science, you had this book that was designed for adults with curiosity as opposed to being an instructional text. And Joe, who is not a fan of science, although I would say he's very good at writing about it, he insisted I take on all the tougher issues, which included nuclear medicine. So how we got into nuclear medicine and this, that, and the other thing. So while I was researching that aspect of this book for the Smithsonian, I was really distracted. And, sometimes you just have those days as a writer where you're just like, and this wasn't a problem before the internet. I grew up writing and doing newspapers before the internet, and you were just stuck with whatever paper was in front of your face or whoever you could get on the phone. And, I was, on the going down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden I'm wandering around the Department of Energy website, as one does, when they're surfing the web. And they had this little history corner, and there was this Ed Westcott photo, one of the ones those of us who are familiar with Manhattan Project history, with Oak Ridge, Tennessee history, have seen many times. Very young women sitting in front of the electromagnetic separation units in Y12. And it was such a beautiful photo. I love photography. I've taken photos since I was a kid, and I was just initially attracted to it as a photo. And I thought it was beautiful, black and white, and it had this just great perspective. And I looked at the caption, and it said, these are young women, many of them high school graduates from rural Tennessee, enriching uranium for the world's first atomic bomb. Many of them will not realize their role in this process till many years later. And I thought, huh, that's interesting. And then of course I thought, you're supposed to be doing this other thing over here, Denise. You are on deadline for this other book for the Smithsonian, which is not, you know, an institution that's shabby. You know, you should probably stay on task. And so I just kind of filed it away and thought, yeah, I'll get back to that later. And it was just one of those things that kept kind of poking at me. And I get lots of ideas all the time, and I keep Post-its, and I mean, always at my side is my journal. I keep notes. Now I keep computer files, all these sorts of things. And you know, sometimes you go back and look at your ideas and you think, good God, this is horrible. This is the stupidest thing I've ever come up with in my life. What was I thinking? And then other times there are things that just sort of won't let you go. And I was so curious about that photo. So then I started looking into just very vaguely via books and old newspaper articles looking into Oak Ridge. And I thought, well, people must know about this. It's just one of those things. We all have information gaps. We all like to act like we know everything, right? I mean, we've all heard if somebody mentions something at a cocktail party, we're like, oh yes, of course, I know all about that. We don't. There are lots of things I don't know about. And so I thought this might be one of those things I just don't know about. I missed that day in history class. So I started asking around. You know, I have friends who are professors at very established universities in the United States. They're history professors, they're English professors. I started asking them, and when I talked to them about this period in history, World War II, and specifically the Manhattan Project, their perspective was exactly what mine was at that time, which was, it was a group of really smart guys in the desert in New Mexico. And that was it. That was it. And it became very clear to me very quickly that there were so many people, women, people of color, people from economically challenged backgrounds, of all, you know, races. And they were all a massive, massive part of this project within the larger history of World War II. And I thought, that's something I want to know a little bit more about. And what's funny is you talk about, sometimes when you write, you talk about kind of pulling on a thread and seeing where things are going to take you. And Ray, you talked about introducing me to Colleen, but I don't know if you remember, before I met Colleen was almost an accident. You took me to meet Connie Bowling. So
Oh,
it
yes.
it always cracks me up. So there we are at a retirement center at Greenfield. And it always makes me laugh that the first person I interviewed in person for the girls of Atomic City was a 101-year-old man. Which you know, and that's just the way it goes.
With a name, yeah, with a name like Connie, Connie.
Exactly. I loved it. And it was, and what a one, I mean, my goodness, to be able to talk to someone who's been on the planet that long, I mean, just such a gift. You know, I mean, whether you're writing a book or not, what an amazing thing to be able to do. And then when I went back down in the lobby, whoo, there was Colleen, and oh my goodness, my love of my life. And so yeah, it's really funny how stories come into your life and how they kind of take hold of you. But you know, your title of your thing is Hidden Histories. And what's funny is, for me, coming into Oak Ridge, because Oak Ridge is a very tight community, everybody there just thought, I mean, I felt like I shouldn't do this book because everybody knows about it, because everybody there just talked about, you know, what went on during World War II, like everybody on the planet knew about it. And I thought to myself, well, I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't, but everybody in Oak Ridge was like, oh, everybody knows this story. Don't you know, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, have I lost my mind? Maybe this is a really bad idea. It instilled an incredible amount of doubt in me.
Oh, mate. Well, I can understand why. Oak Ridgers do know their history more than maybe most. And the thing
do you
is,
feel like the younger generations do, Ray? I'm always curious about that, because there's such an ongoing, incredible scientific role in American history that Oak Ridge continues to play. Do you feel like the new folks living and working there are attached to that history?
No, there's an interesting thing that's happening in Oak Ridge, and I won't spend but a little bit of time on it, but Oak Ridge is being absorbed into Appalachia now. It came in here in the 40s, plopped in a bunch of educated people, cultured people into the middle of Appalachia, had a strong influence in the surrounding communities, helped the communities, was rejected by the communities initially, but now over the years, things have changed. And now what you're seeing is people coming into Oak Ridge. By the way, a gauge is the free and reduced lunches in schools. Used to be 0. A few years ago, it started climbing. It's up to 60+% now. So the climate in Oak Ridge is changing. For a bit of time, it was a retirement community. Now, the time you were here, it was still a lot of those older folks were here. Most of them are gone now. I have one Calutron girl that I can call on. Ruth Huddleston is the only one that still I have available who can talk, and I utilize her quite a lot. But no, the young people don't. I mean, come on, they don't even remember the Vietnam War. You understand what I'm saying? That's not a part of their
I'm just
recognition.
curious. No, go ahead.
Most of them will remember the atomic bomb, but then when you start talking about nuclear medicine, nuclear energy, those sorts of things, it's there's an age gap in the middle that don't really care much about it. Interestingly enough, some of the younger, the very young, the Instagram generation, are more interested, I find, in our history than some of the others. One of the things I'm doing now is talking to schools by letting them see Keith's documentary film, The Secret City, and they'll use a little plug that's got me in it. And then the teacher will FaceTime with me on my iPhone, tell the students to come up with some questions for the Oak Ridge historian, FaceTime me, and I answer those questions online with FaceTime. Simple little technology that's working. And the younger folks are more interested in it than the college age and the younger married generation.
You know,
So
Ray, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, to go along with that, you know, I had kind of a career change about 6 months ago. I'm teaching high school now, and where I was teaching in college, I'm teaching high school. I'm teaching audio video production in Roane County, which is a neighboring county in Kingston. And I showed just this week, as a matter of fact, I showed my 3 classes that I have every day, Secret City, the Oak Ridge story, my film that I made. And I asked, you know, before I showed it, I said, how many of you have seen this film before? And there might have been 1 out of 25 in each class that had seen it. And I told them, I said, here's the reason I'm showing this to you. I said, for 2 reasons. One, it's your history. It's the local history. It's what your grandparents lived through here, you know, in just, you know, 15 miles away, 12 to 15 miles away. And secondly, I said, as audio video production teacher, I made this film. I can talk about how I made it, you know, and what goes into doing that. But, you know, you're absolutely right. There's a whole generation that has no clue whatsoever. And I'm not sure that that much interested in it at this point.
Well, I would
But
say, actually, I think that's really interesting. And I think it's actually I think it's more than one generation.
I'm
I
sure.
agree.
And
Yeah.
what's interesting is you could have chosen any film, right? You're teaching audio visual, your production, you're teaching production.
Mhm.
You could have chosen anything to illustrate that, but you chose history and local history, something that ideally these younger folks who are what, like 17, 16, 17 years old?
14 to 17.
Okay, so it was not their grandparents.
Yeah.
Right? I could be their grandparent.
Well, they would be their great grandparents.
Yes, I could be their grandparent. And but you chose something that could possibly be meaningful to them,
Mhm.
and that could possibly help connect them to their community,
Mhm.
and that could possibly inspire them to share stories of their own in their own way via film, television, online, whatever. And this to me is really interesting because, as Ray was mentioning, we do have so many folks who, not just with the history of the Manhattan Project, with all sorts of histories, national, regional, local, that are getting lost. And these histories are important because they do have a tie and a connection to the present. I think when we talk about Oak Ridge and we talk about the Manhattan Project, it's incredibly obvious, right? I mean, nuclear war, nuclear energy, nuclear medicine. These are all things that are very important parts still of our culture and our society.
Mhm.
So to be able to help kids understand and connect to that is really important. And I'm always really interested in how we all manage to do that, because even you guys are in Oak Ridge where so much of this history took place, and it is still a challenge to get younger generations to connect to this history, despite the fact that this history is not, in some sort of hermetically sealed box in the past. We are still using nuclear medicine. We are still using nuclear energy. In fact, nuclear energy has taken on a much greater presence in the last, I would say, probably 3 to 5 years. So I'm always fascinated about this as a storyteller. How do we get folks to engage, and especially younger folks to engage in history? I mean, it's in Oak Ridge, you have this incredible community, or had, and we've lost so many of them, as Ray knows very well, and I do, I do too. People who lived through certain moments in time, but what they accomplished and what continues about what they worked on is still relevant in today's climate. How do we engage? Younger folks, and even, folks in their 30s and 40s,
Let me tell you what's happening in Oak Ridge right now. There are two things that are being done that are reaching the young folks. One of them is Katie the Cayatron Girl. It's a little set of videos that are being produced by Explore Oak Ridge, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Katie Watt. And they've got this young girl. Her name is Katie, K-A-D-I, but they've named her Katie, K-A-T-I-E, the Cayatron Girl. And she comes on with 3 to 4 minute short videos talking about the history of Oak Ridge. The Oak Ridge, or the American Museum of Science and Energy, has Riley, the intern. And she's another young girl that's showing videos about, now her focus is on the museum, but that internet outreach that we are able to get to on Instagram, to a little extent Facebook's for the old folks, but that internet outreach is working well. And there's some young people that are interested in doing that.
Do you think it manages to make its way into the K through 12 atmosphere?
Yes, I do. And I think it's a selection of what social media platforms you use. You got to know where they are, and you got to get to them quick. They want a 1 minute video, and that's all they want. But I think you can reach them with information that they will pay attention to. One more quick story, and then I want to ask you to talk with me a minute about Virginia Coleman. I want us to reminisce on her a bit. I was talking to a class in Farragut, a class of 4th and 5th graders. And I spoke to them. I've got a little presentation I do, PowerPoint, videos, that sort of stuff. I spoke for 40 minutes, got through, a bell rung for their lunch. One of the little students said, "Mr. Smith, if we go get our lunch and bring it in here, will you keep talking?"
Oh,
I said, "That's up to your teacher. I
I
don't
love
know."
it.
She said, "Well, sure, I'll be glad to let them do that." So they went and got their lunch, come back. I went on for another 45 minutes.
I love
So
it.
anyway, yes, the young kids are interested, but they're not going to learn facts. They're not going to pay attention to years. The stale standard history presentations don't reach them. Videos do. Good storytellers do. I don't claim to be great, but I love telling stories. And
They do, and you're a great storyteller. I worry about the scrolling. I mean, the reason I ask about school is I worry about the scrolling aspect of things like Instagram and TikTok, as opposed to making inroads into curriculum. I mean,
Yes.
that to me, the whole curriculum aspect.
Well,
Just
the
because
thing you have to know is that Keith is the epitome of that. He's come full circle.
no, that's why I love what he's doing.
I know it, and it's literally in the curriculum. It's
And
not
you
something.
you absolutely are correct when you talk about storytelling. You know, I could lecture for 15, 20 minutes on a topic, and maybe my students are high school students, 9th through 12th grade, and maybe they'll get something out of it. But then I can go into a story that I can tell them from my experience, and they will remember that. They will remember a story, whether they remember anything else. And I always have a conversation with them. I say, okay, what are the social media platforms that you follow? You know, and you're right. And I tell them, you know, I have a big following on Facebook. I said, because I'm old. And, you know, it's for old people. My students don't even do Instagram very often, and they don't do Twitter. I think they're a little young for Twitter. Some of them do TikTok, but Snapchat is the thing that is kind of their big thing now. So
well, a lot of them are doing Snapchat for other reasons. But
I know exactly. But anyway, it's so yeah. I mean, you just have to find out where they are and what they will respond to, and do the best. And this age,
stories key. You're right.
Yeah,
Stories
absolutely. Yeah,
and that's neuroscience too. They've done studies on how humans remember facts, situations, details better if they are put within the context of a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me make another plug real quick. We have the Flatwater storytelling, Flatwater Tales storytelling workshop, not a workshop, a program it has a workshop in it. That's in Oak Ridge in June of each year. This year, we have a lady, Sheila Arnold, that she's already been to Oak Ridge. I spent a day with her, and she's going to tell the story of the Scarborough 85. Now, the Scarborough 85 are the 85 African Americans from the Scarborough community that integrated the high school in Robertsville. And she's an outstanding, well-known storyteller. And I am so anxious for that. She's going to let us record it, and we'll have it for future use. And she's doing her research now. And I'm so excited about that. But the Flatwater Tales in Oak Ridge is, I don't want to say it's better than, competing with, or anything, but it's much like the Jones or Festival.
Hey, we're in Southern Appalachia. This is we're all down here. This is storytelling land. We believe in our stories. We value our stories. But I mean, she should also, that sounds wonderful. I'm actually a charter member of the International African American Museum that's going to open in Charleston later in late 2022. It's being built now. They've been working on it for years and years, and they have a lot of history there. They would love to know about that, I'm sure,
Well,
because it's not
we'll-
just low country history.
Yeah, we'll make that connection at the appropriate time through you.
Yeah.
I think that's outstanding. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Virginia Coleman just a minute. I don't want to miss that. I want you to talk about your relationship with her. She wasn't a Calutron girl. She was a chemist.
Well, that's the thing. When I decided to do, there were so many things that were running through my mind when I was thinking about doing the Girls of Atomic City and how did I want to do it and how do you want to focus? And having come out of journalism for many years out of New York and just having that be my training, structure is very, very important to me. So how I wanted to structure the book became very important to me. And that's one of the first things I think about. Structure and outline are the first things I think about when I'm thinking about doing a book, even though I may get very intellectually or emotionally attached to certain aspects of the story. And one of the things I decided very early on was I did not want everyone to work in Y12. I did not want everyone to work in K25. I did not want everyone to be married. I did not want everyone to be single. I did not want everyone to be white. I did not want everyone to be Black. I wanted there to be a wide variety of all of those things. And that had a lot to do with who I chose to focus on as I told the story. So it was there were a couple things that went into who I decided to focus on because I interviewed so many more people than ended up being the main characters in the book.
Mhm.
And one of those key things was I wanted people who had been there for an extended period of time, as much as 43 to 45, ideally. At 42 to 45, fantastic. 44 to 45, okay. But people who were there for short amount of times wouldn't necessarily work for me. And so I definitely did want women who were in science because before they were calling it STEM, STEM was something I was interested in. So encountering Virginia and her experience as a young woman with an incredible capacity, just not a young woman with an incredible capacity, a young human, a young person with an incredible capacity for science, who, had studied, gone to, Chapel Hill, who came from very, very humble beginnings and had gone through so much. Being able to watch her and see her explore her role in Oak Ridge, first by training other people who were going to be working there, then finally getting placed in a lab, enduring, what we would call today sexual harassment in the lab. And it was sexual harassment then, they just didn't call it that. It was just plain old, misogyny. And then, coming into her own and meeting a man that she really connected with, who respected who she was as a human and as a scientist, and growing that partnership. It was spectacular to be able to learn about that, but then also to just, I became very, very close with her. My husband, Joe, became very close with her. We stopped staying in hotels and started staying at Virginia's house when I was doing interviews. And, she came to Asheville with her family not long before she left us. And we got to have a really wonderful, long lunch with her. And, I was on the phone with her within 24 hours of I was one of the people she talked to, before she passed. And she was just such an inspiration to me, the way she lived her life. And it was not an easy life that she lived. I mean, it's easy when you're a writer and you look at someone's entire existence and you can apply this narrative to it that looks like the classic hero's journey. Oh, they came from this and they accomplished this and they did this and they inspired these people. And that looks really great when you're writing it as a story. And it can be easy to forget that was really crappy to live through as an individual. And yet she endured and she thrived and she inspired other people. And I mean, just a class act, start to finish. And it just amazing. And there are so many, what I think about is there's so many people like Virginia in the world that we don't get to experience. And to be able to bring a little bit of who she was to others meant a lot to me. But also, I mean, from a completely selfish standpoint, just getting to know her and getting to say I was a friend of hers, really just means the world to me.
Thank you, Denise. I knew that's what you could do. Let me take just a little tangent and say what you've just explained to us about the value of relationships. I mean, the fact that you met this lady, that she was already up in her years when you met her, and you watched her as she went to the end of her life, but you knew her. You spent time with her. You were in her home. You got to know her in a way that these little videos and documentaries, I mean, those are good, don't get me wrong, but to have a relationship between a younger person and an older person that has lived life's experiences is extremely valuable.
And we can all be doing that, and we should all be doing that. I mean, I really value having friends that are older than me. And I'm now at I'm in my 50s. So I'm now at the age where I have good friends who are, adults who are younger than me, and it's, I value those friends who are 20 years younger and 20 years older, because everybody has something to give and to learn. You never stop learning. If you're doing life right, you never stop learning, right? There's always got to be the curiosity. You lose your curiosity as a human, that is a sad day. And and so you can learn from people younger than you can learn from people older than you can learn from people, especially from people different than you. I think a lot of, we were talking about social media before. I think too much of it is an echo chamber. We spend too much time just listening to other people who are exactly like we are. And it can be hard to try and reach out and have shared experiences with people who aren't just like we are, because it's too easy to have experiences with people who are very similar to who we are. Yeah. But it's so valuable, it's so valuable. And I think programs like the one you guys are doing right now is really important. They're really important, to be able to put these things out there and hopefully connect the distant past to the present and show that relevance and show that connection, and maybe open up some people's eyes and say, oh yeah, maybe there are other ways to look at the world, and there are other perspectives, and some of those perspectives might come from 75 years ago,
That's exactly right. And you have to know that the book, The Girls of Atomic City, when you published that in 2013, you immediately, it went to the bestseller list almost immediately. And then you began a book tour. You went nationwide. And I want you to know that during that period of time, we appropriately gave you a Muddy Boot Award. We appropriately recognized you.
It sits in a place of honor in my office right now upstairs.
Okay, very good. But we recognized you were the best thing we had going, the best ambassador, because as you said, most of the places where you went, when you said I wrote a book about Oak Ridge, they'd say, Oak what? I mean, they didn't really know much about us. And you were reaching an audience that we weren't able to reach with a national bestseller. So you just got to know that was a wonderful time for us. And it still is bringing rewards now. That's not unusual for me to get an outreach from a person that's read your book. And I've been able to go to—
I'm doing a history day thing with kids this week.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
See, it's still very much alive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, hey, talk a little about some of your other work that you've done. We know you've done some good things in Oak Ridge, and we
Yeah.
appreciate that. But
Well,
you got other stuff too.
yeah, one of my favorite things to do is kind of look at large moments in history through tiny focused lenses. So, Oak Ridge or Girls of Atomic City to me was the dawn of the nuclear age, which is a very big topic, through a very tiny lens of these women and their experience. Last Castle, which is the story of Biltmore House, the largest house ever in the United States of America, inhabited by George and Edith Vanderbilt and their daughter Cornelia. That was, to me, a story of the last hurrah of the Gilded Age, and how times changed at the end of the 19th century as the 20th century dawned. So that was the big story, but the tiny lens was looking at that moment in time through Biltmore House, which is to this day the largest house ever built in the United States of America. Still in the family, still in Western North Carolina, and still having a tremendous impact on the United States, in that because people focus so much on what the Vanderbilts built in constructing Biltmore. But what I think their most valuable contribution is what they did not build and what they preserved, the Pisgah National Forest. And that was a very important aspect to me of, as the industrial age took off, we were starting to tear down places like that. And we were starting to develop a lot. We were starting to deforest a lot. And the Vanderbilts in Western North Carolina managed to preserve thousands upon thousands of acres of really beautiful, incredible, valuable, biodiverse land that still exists preserved today. So that's The Last Castle. And again, that has very strong female protagonists. Edith Vanderbilt is one of the reasons I wanted to write that. So I definitely, I always want to write histories that have something to do with someone who was important, but maybe didn't get quite all the attention or credit that I think they deserve. That carries over into We Gather Together, which is my most recent book, which is a history of gratitude and giving thanks on this continent and in the United States. So I say on this continent and in the United States because I start before the United States existed. And, the heart of that story is, a widowed mother of 5, Sarah Josepha Hale, who is the woman who's responsible for the fact that we have a day of thanks once a year, the same time every year in the United States, and what she endured to make that happen. How we got there, and what we're told in school is not how we is not the basis of that holiday, and where the holiday has come since and where it can still go, because gratitude practices have always been a part of the human existence. And now in the 21st century, we actually have neuroscientific data to back that up, that it is very important and very worthwhile. I'm very excited that this coming fall 2022, the picture book, Giving Thanks, is coming out. That is going to be a partner book for We Gather Together. And it is a children's picture book that looks at gratitude and the history of giving thanks in America. And I like to say it's a Thanksgiving book with no pilgrims. Yay! And it's going to be lovely. I'm very excited. And there is also going to be a young reader, a middle school edition of We Gather Together that's going to come out in 2023. So those are done. And then right now I am deep in my latest big history book titled Obstinate Daughters. I don't talk about this a lot. I'm talking about it a little right now. It's titled Obstinate Daughters. And that title comes from an 18th century London newspaper cartoon. When King George and England were very frustrated that they thought they would just sail into Charleston Harbor and take over Sullivan's Island and just kind of start their sweep up the East Coast. Charleston and Charleston Harbor were very, very important during the Revolutionary War and during colonial times. And so after a failed attempt to take Sullivan's Island and Charleston Harbor, a London newspaper had a cartoon of a woman, very proper woman, big, beautiful hair, and she had cannons and all sorts of armaments in her hairdo. And underneath it said, Miss Carolina Sullivan, obstinate daughter. And so that's where I got the title of my book from. And it's a look at colonial revolutionary times in America through the experiences of women and people of color and indigenous peoples. And there's also a thread of that story where I myself go on a trip tracing the steps of these people and looking at their legacy or lack thereof in the present day. So that's what I'm doing right now. It's been a little challenging during COVID because I haven't been able to travel to all the places I need to, but I'm like starting to, it's just, I've been doing what I can, and I've gotten some trips in, but there are more that I need to do. So that's what I'm
Well, good. And I think that is an excellent choice of a subject matter. I'm amazed at how you can pick those things out like that title. But I know when you go into that research, you're going to do some information. You're going to have some information about Kings Mountain. And that, of course, comes from East Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And that battle was very, very important in the Revolutionary War. And I want to lay another thought for you. As you look at the indigenous people, keep in mind Nancy Ward.
Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, yeah. And I've already been to Cherokee. Oh, yeah, of course. Oh, yeah.
All right, excellent. Now, I'm gonna be real quick here. Do you know the story of the Nancy Ward statue?
I do.
Oh, okay.
And I've been to Cherokee. I've talked to actually existing Cherokee elders, and I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'm on it. But
Good
thank you.
deal,
But
good deal.
if I have any questions, because I know you are a student of Native American history, so I'll be sure to.
And Ray is our local Nancy Ward statue expert. So, that's for sure. So
Denise, let me remind you real quick, Keith. Let me remind you that Nancy Ward statue stayed on a white woman's grave for 80 years. It was stolen off, went to New York City, was in an art show, went to Maine, traveled around to Massachusetts. And I've been chasing it the whole time. I'm going to write a book about it, but not for just right now. Now I've gotten it back into Tennessee. It's in Memphis.
Well, the movement of statues is obviously very relevant right now as we take down statues in various parts of the United States, but also in We Gather Together, my latest book, I talk about the statue of Massasoit, or Usamiquin, depending on how you're referring to him. The great Wampanoag leader who was responsible for the survival of the Pilgrims. And this statue that was erected of him in Plymouth, and also did the story of the erection of the statue and the creation of the statue is in and of itself fascinating. And I put that in the book, but also the movement, where the statue went. There's a book called Monumental Mobility that is about that statue and how that statue has moved around. So people writing books about statues being moved around is a thing. So that's a good idea.
Let me tell you one more thing. I'm now on the Tennessee State Historical Commission, and I've been involved in all of these removal of Confederate statues in Tennessee, all of the lawsuits associated with it. We took Nathan Bedford Forrest's bust out of the Capitol and put it in the State Museum. And by the way, they moved his body here down into Middle Tennessee, into Columbia. And a little town in Middle Tennessee put a little note up on social media saying, "We moved the statue here. It's in the middle of our town." It's crazy. I'm telling you, it's just crazy. And I'm right in the middle of it with the historical.
It's evolution. It has to happen. It all has to happen.
Absolutely.
We just roll with it. You gotta go.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Well, Denise, thank you so much. Do you have anything
You're
else
very
you can
welcome.
share
Thank you
with
for
us?
having me.
any final thoughts before we leave, Denise?
No, I just, I'm always, history is not something that lives in the past. That would
Right.
be my final thought. History is not in the past.
An excellent,
We are all
thought.
making history.
Yes.
We are all making history. Let us take that seriously.
That's exactly right.
No.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ray. Do we have somebody lined up for our next time?
Absolutely, we do. We have Dr. Judith Stogler, who is the founder and director of the Japan Institute in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And along with her, we're going to have Clifton Truman Daniel, who is the grandson of President Truman. They're both going to join us next time. And that will be another fun time to talk with her.
Nice.
I gave her a tour of Oak Ridge at Clifton's suggestion. He made the connection for us. And she fell in love with the International Friendship Bell. I mean, her comment was, I wish I had something like this in Los Alamos. So I'm sure we're going to talk about the bell when she comes.
All right.
By the way, she also is planning a trip to Japan in 2023 to go to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Kyoto.
Yeah.
I've signed up. I'm going.
You can tell me all about it when you get back. I'm not much of a traveler overseas. So.
I'm just hoping I can get Fanny in good enough health that she can go with me.
I do too. I do too. Well, thank you so much, Denise. Thank you, Ray. And folks,
Thank you,
thanks for
guys.
watching. We appreciate it. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City.